Today's a day that I've been looking forward to for several months, and I am hoping that this is a beginning of a relationship that will continue to blossom. Fanta Traore is an exciting individual that I've had the opportunity to talk to multiple times, but I have followed closely on social media because she inspires me. She leads with passion. She has a cause and sees a way that she can change the world and has leaned into it 100%. I will save all the additional things I want to say till the end because I really want you all to start hearing from her as soon as possible. But more importantly, knowing Fanta, she's going to be really excited to engage in conversation with you. So please jot down your questions, ask away. Fanta, thank you for making your time available to us. And as I said, I have been looking forward to this for several months. Thanks.
Also have been looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I am such a fan of your work, Dr. A, and I wish that when I was starting off in Econ, I had access to content like yours because it just makes it so accessible. And we need more of that in economics. And the work that you're doing around getting students exposed to R and so forth is so important. As someone who went to an under-resourced undergraduate institution, in some respects, I see the value of the work that you do. So a huge fan of it, huge fan of what Jenny is doing as well, and excited to be here with everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join me. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'll start off by sharing some of my slides here. And so as I do that, I'll share a bit about my background. So I am currently a dual degree student at Yale University, where I am pursuing a master's in public policy, as well as my MBA. And prior to that, I worked at the Federal Reserve as a research assistant for 2 years. Before that, I worked in the social innovation incubator space in New York and also in South Africa, supporting organizations across the world. And in doing that work, it was very inspiring to be around young people who are innovating and looking at problems in their communities and creating solutions for it. Prior to that, I was at Howard University, where I studied political science and economics. And my introduction to econ, I like to say, really started with growing up in New York City and having lots of questions. And I think that when it comes to career journeys, it can really just be that simple, right? Like you see problems that you are interested in addressing, and then you take action on it. And next thing you know, you have built a career off of it. And so my career journey is one that nothing of it has been like specifically planned, with the exception of pursuing graduate school, because that was a seed that my parents had planted a long time ago and that I knew that I had to pursue. And a whole nother conversation. Maybe we can get to that in Q&A. But after taking the GRE 4 times, well, 5 times actually, I can't say that that was an accident. But everything else was just like, you know, having questions, wanting to explore those questions further. And that's how I ended up making those career pivots. But to start us off, I am also here to talk about the Sadie Collective, the nonprofit organization that I created alongside my co-founder, Anna Gifty Opoku Ajiman. So I'll give a brief introduction to that. And the Sadie Collective was created with this mission and vision in mind to create opportunities for Black women in economics. And what I'll walk us through here is an introduction of how the Sadie Collective has come into being, inspired by elements of my story. And then I'll speak more about the collective and our journey and how it's manifested over time. And then go into some general important lessons that I've had over the course of my career, which I hope will resonate with you all. And then we'll go into questions. All right, so there is this African proverb which goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it speaks to the importance of community and using community as a vehicle to go further than where you would if you were just going alone, keeping your head down. And I think this applies in so many different facets of life and how we navigate the world. For instance, the pandemic, right? Like if we're not all wearing masks, we're in this pandemic for a while. So that's an example there. But then also in the context of the Sadie Collective, we started off as my co-founder and I having an idea, acting on that idea, and then becoming this movement. But in becoming this movement, we crowdsourced from different people around their engagement with the idea that we had so that it can come into fruition. And when I think about the process of creating the collective element of it was born out of recognizing this problem that we're seeing in the economics profession, which looks like for Black women getting a PhD in economics on an annual basis has to be solved by the collective. It can't be put just on Black women to address this issue of representation. It can't be put just on a few early career women to transform the profession. It takes institutions, it takes institutional commitments. That looks like universities, think tanks, financial services, organizations, companies rather, and so forth. And so this is a quote that's resonated with me throughout my whole life and continues to be the basis for how I think about building initiatives, building solutions to problems that we experience in the economics profession and also more broadly. Additionally, I wanted to touch on this quote by Audre Lorde, who is a Black feminist author who inspires me regularly. And when I lived in South Africa and worked at the entrepreneurship incubator there, I would share quotes on my door because I was living on campus. So the entrepreneurship incubator that I worked for was on a campus of a boarding school. And I was quote unquote a hall mistress, which is an archaic term. And so I told my students that they could call me Auntie Fanta. So they still call me that to this day. Some of them call me Miss still, but what's really funny is that some of us were around like the same age, right? So like I was 21 at the time when I went to school. Some of the students were like 20. And the way the boarding school works is that it prioritizes entrepreneurship in the curriculum. It's a 2-year program that when you participate in it, you get exposed to a network of young leaders from all across Africa who are learning about entrepreneurship, who are learning to be leaders, and who are incredibly inspired and motivated to lead in their countries, whether that is from a leadership standpoint of a political lens or from other sectors. And so this is one of the quotes that I would put on my door: when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. And as I left Howard University and started to explore what my voice sounds like in the workplace and more broadly, this is the quote that I would always go back to because it really captures that we all feel fear and we just have to act through it anyway. And so that resonates with me because public speaking is not something that I feel comfortable doing as a young woman, a young teen. And it's something that I've grown into doing. and have learned to appreciate and get excited about it, because I know that when I speak, when I dare to be powerful, it helps to shape conversations. It helps to move us into a direction that the conversation normally was not going to go. And this shows up in so many different ways. For instance, when I was at the Fed, I requested a prayer room. We were briefly talking about how it's Ramadan, and I requested a prayer room. And from the reactions of some of the staff who I requested this from, I can tell that there was this feeling of like, oh, she's Muslim, or like, oh, that's like something that we didn't think about. This idea of having a prayer room on our campus, on site in the workplace, and if I did not make that request, it wouldn't have went into their consciousness. It wouldn't have become a priority. There would have been another Muslim employee who would come into the institution and who may not know if this is a question that they want to ask. And perhaps because I use my voice, because I dared to be powerful, I made room for them to offer this information of space for you to pray during Ramadan, because I brought up the question and made the request. And so that is a quote that really resonates with me and that motivates a lot of what I do, because fear is something that we are all going to feel at any point in time, and we have to work through it. And that's where our power comes from, choosing to work through it and making that decision so that it makes and creates ease for anyone who's coming after us and for ourselves. So I'll now go into getting into the field of economics. And getting into the field of economics for me, was done in a way that wasn't straightforward. And I find that often for Black women in the field, this is often the case, that it wasn't straightforward, that it wasn't like you came in freshman year and then you went into an econ major. It's more of like you did political science, or maybe you went into math, maybe you even went into engineering, and then you stumbled across econ, like during your sophomore, junior, and in my case, my senior year. And how I got into econ was that I went to Princeton for a summer where they had this program called the Public Policy and International Affairs Program. And basically, they find student leaders from all across different campuses who are presidents of African Students Associations, which I was at the time. I was vice president during my junior year and then became president my senior year. And basically students who are organizers, who are leading and very motivated about public service. And what they do during the summer program is they help to fill in this gap around understanding policy, around data. And they do this through the summer program so that you are better equipped to lead. And during that summer program, I got introduced to a policymaker who helped to end a food desert in Harlem. So I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. And I also spent a lot of time in Harlem because my high school is there, and now my family actually lives in Harlem. And so hearing about this food desert ending in my Harlem community because of economic research just made it so easy for me to see that if I want to create change, I need to use the tools of economics. So I then went back to Howard University, became an economics major, and the rest is history. So I took 10 econ courses that year, which was, I don't recommend that. I think you all are having a really great start now with having exposure to programs like this to Dr. A. And so that's what I ended up doing, taking a whole bunch of econ courses. And then eventually made my way to the Federal Reserve. And my way to the Fed was inspired by being in the social innovation space and recognizing that there are macro issues that are keeping these solutions that the young people I were working with at the African Leadership Academy, and also the leaders that I was working with at Echoing Green, from making an impact at scale. And so because of my interest in wanting to understand what it looks like to make impact at scale, that led me to going to the Federal Reserve after doing another summer program, also known as the American Economic Association Summer Program. And that was incredible. That's where I learned about the Fed, ended up going to the Fed, and immediately recognized the lack of representation in the discipline of economics. And the reason why it was so clear to me is because I grew up in really diverse communities. I grew up in New York City, which something that is important to name here is that New York is segregated, but in the segregated parts that I were in, I was exposed to people from all across the world. I was exposed to so many different cultures. That was my norm. Then I went to Howard University, where I was exposed to the diversity of the African diaspora. Then I went to African Leadership Academy, a Pan-African school, which is bringing together young leaders from 44 African countries. And then I went to Echoing Green, where the leader of the organization is Cheryl Dorsey, and she is a phenomenal Black woman who is leading this institution at a time under a very tumultuous presidency, where the initiatives she was focusing on were on climate change, on Black men and their achievement, and so forth. And so I say all of that to set the stage of why, when I went into the Fed and I was the only Black woman in the international finance division, I was shocked. Like, it's one of those things where your nervous system reacts, because it's like, wow, I can't believe that I am the only Black person in this room who's doing anything around economic research. And then another dimension for this for me was like, well, if this is the case, like, how do I blend in with the cultural norms of this space? And the reason why I explored that is because I felt like I was looking very obvious in that I was different. And so I remember vividly going to Banana Republic and getting myself what I understood to be the economist uniform, which is a blue button-down shirt and gray slacks. So I got myself a pair of those. I slicked my hair back, which it takes a lot of energy. For those of you who may not be familiar with like Black hair care, to slick your hair back or to make it straight takes a lot of effort. And it's a clear analogy towards assimilation and seeking that out. And I did that for like 3 weeks. And then it got to a point where it was like, actually, this is just not healthy for my hair. And I know better than this. And the I know better than this moment came from working with a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert at the Fed named Quentin Johnson. And he and I had a few conversations. I was like, I just can't believe like this is the reality. Like, how am I the only Black woman in this room? And he went to Morehouse for undergrad, a school for all Black men. And so he understood where I was coming from with that. And what he offered to me was affirmations and using affirmations. And that was the first time that I ever felt that I needed to use them, because the spaces that I were in did not require me to affirm myself. And that really helped to change my understanding of how I can show up in this space. And I also got invited to speak on a panel to students about economics at the Fed. And in having that opportunity, I worked with Quentin to think about how I'm going to tell my story and do so in an authentic way. I also had a moment where I thought about like, well, so who's going to be in this audience and how do I want to show up in this space, especially if there's anyone who looks like me who is in this audience. And so in those reflections, I realized that I want to be myself. I want to be authentic. I want to be accessible. And that, and also the science of like ease when it comes to Black hair care made it so that I chose to wear my braids for that event. And it was during that event that I announced the Sadie Collective conference happening in February that year. This was in 2018. And at that point, I had no idea that the Sadie Collective is going to become what it is today, an organization that has members from 45 different countries, that is partnering with institutions across the world in order to normalize that Black women are economists, and also redefine how we understand and study economics. And so I say all that to say that when it comes to making an impact and pursuing change in your career, it starts with really simple decisions and actions, which then trickle into creating experiences that are beyond your wildest imagination. And when it came to the Sadie Collective, it was really constant experimenting and taking small steps here and there to bring this vision to life. And so that was one of those moments saying, hey, like, this is a conference that I am organizing. You all are welcome to come to it. It's named for this woman, Dr. Sadie Alexander, America's first Black economist. And yeah, just like sharing that out there. And even in building the collective, it's small actions that were taken on a regular basis that led to this conference experience that then featured Chair Janet Yellen, Governor Brainerd, eventually included partners like Brookings Institution, Mathematica, Policy Research. It was a small action of like going on Econ Twitter and being like, hey, we have this Google form. If you want to get involved, sign up, and so forth. And it was accidental. It wasn't anything that it was premeditated in the sense that when me and Anna went to an economics conference in 2018, that January, we were just really shocked about what we were experiencing there, because Econ is about social structures and change. However, everyone who's in this room is white and male for the most part. And so that disconnect between Black women leading and being a part of social justice movements and who had seats of power to discuss the economy and who were in this space raised this desire to create the same experience, except centering Black women and having all of the speakers be Black women, all of the guests be Black women, creating an intergenerational exchange. So that is a bit about how I got to where I am now. I'm currently at Yale, as I mentioned, pursuing a dual degree, but I'm also on sabbatical. So I'm taking a year off to focus on the collective and also just to rest, because as I've shared, I've taken the GRE 5 times. I don't wish that on anybody. Don't do it. Take it twice. Because actually, so what you see with the trends of my GRE is that by the time I got to the 5th test, my body was over it and was like, we're giving up. Why are we here again? And so my score was abysmal and was nothing like anything I've even seen on a practice test. So yeah, that's a piece of advice, unsolicited, but I spent so much time on that exam. And so this slide captures the trends that we see here for Black women in economics. Less than 1% of those who are getting doctoral degrees in the field are Black women. It looks like 4 Black women on an annual basis. That's what we saw in 2020 in the most recent data. The year before that, it was 5. So it actually went down. In 1921, it was 1 person, and that was Dr. Sadie Alexander. And so over a 100-year time horizon, these are the trends that we're seeing. And it's quite shocking. And also what we know is that the pipeline matters. And this is what the pipeline looks like for some of the adjacent fields to economics and economics itself. So in the year that I graduated in 2015, around 615 Black women across the United States graduated with an Econ undergraduate degree. 615. So this is around 1.8% of all of those who are graduating with a economics undergraduate degree, And so that leaves much room for improvement. It should be at least 7% to make it on par with the national average. And that's what we're looking to change at the Sadie Collective. And we do that through several different initiatives, from our programs to the services that we provide to institutions, and then finally through the advocacy work that we do at the collective. And so that is what we see here. And we do a lot. We've been doing a lot of different things, and in doing it, we are centering Black women throughout it all. The programs that we offer range from having, and this is actually happening this week, which I'm super excited for, having 25 scholars come to New York City after 4 months of coaching from Black women and getting exposure to JP Morgan, and having them all come in person to fellowship with one another, but then also to learn from analysts about the firm, to learn about economic research opportunities within financial services. I didn't know that you could study economics and then go into economic research at JP Morgan Chase. So those are the kind of opportunities that we're exposing our members to. And we are building this pipeline so that we can see more Black women in influential positions in the economy, because what we see is that we're overrepresented in certain fields. And so our goal is to make that shift happen, and also to acknowledge that Black women are the backbone of the US economy. When we think about this term essential workers, and that suddenly being a thing as a result of the pandemic, what we have to keep in mind is that a majority of those people are Black women, home health aides, cashiers, and so forth. Black women are overrepresented in those roles. And so it's also worth noting that the Latinx population also has a large representation in some of these essential worker roles. And when I talk about this idea of Black women best and centering Black women, it's considering how, when we look at the intersection of racism and sexism and how that impacts these communities, we can create better solutions for everyone when we consider those two nuances. So for instance, when we're looking at unemployment data, taking a look at how unemployment data looks like for intersectional identities, and having solutions that target the needs for people with those intersectional ideas is what can actually improve the aggregate unemployment rate. So with that being said, as you can see here, we do a whole lot of different things, of which is continuing the tradition of Black economists within the discipline. So the National Economics Association is one of those organizations that has been doing similar work to what we're doing here. We're also looking at Dr. Sadie Alexander, who, even though she didn't have the chance to practice as an economist, she was doing advocacy work, and she was speaking up about the economic research that she did with the National Urban League and so forth. And so we're creating spaces for Black women through these different spheres of influence that we have. Notable is the conference that we host every year in February during Black History Month, which is after the Sadie Summit here on programs. And then we also do a conference for Black youth more broadly in Chicago with the Chicago Federal Reserve. We create mentorship relationships for members of the Sadie Collective community, which historically has been tied to our conference experience, but we're looking to broaden that. And then finally, our high school clubs is one of the aspects that I'm most excited about. And that's because for the graph that I showed here around who's studying econ, we can change and increase that amount with reaching people in high school and getting them excited about studying econ sooner. And what we're seeing now is that those students who are participating in our program, their introduction to economics is through our program. And so as far as they're concerned, econ is full of Black women, of which, we're looking to get them to join our community so that they can be supported as they are matriculating in the economics profession. So when that hard reality hits, they have each other. But I think it's really awesome that they get to understand economics through understanding the research that Dr. Lisa D. Cook is doing, through meeting the young economists who are serving as coaches for this program and who are exposing them to how they use economics on a regular basis, whether it's in their personal work or as a graduate student. And then next we have services, and the services range from consulting and research, which we provide to institutions to, one, improve how they do policymaking, and then two, to help with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within their organizations. So when we're looking at data like 0 Black economists at the Federal Reserve Board, that leaves room for improvement, to say the least. And that looks like helping to establish partnerships between them and the Sadie Collective so that we can assist them with having more diversity in that pipeline. And then finally, the membership portal that we have is one of the ways that we engage with our members. And basically, this is our digital community hub for members within our community, which includes recruiters as well as Black women in the field. And in that, we share resources, our partners share resources as well. And all of that allows our community to engage from across the world. And then finally, the advocacy work that we do has become one of the main things that we are known for. And that looks like the open letters that we've written. So we wrote an open letter to economic institutions in 2020 at the wake of the killing of George Floyd, may he rest in peace. And we challenge economic institutions to step up as it relates to creating better opportunities for Black people in the field, and then more broadly in how they are approaching issues for the Black community. We also give out an annual Allies Awards. And what that looks like is recognizing allies who have been supportive of the Sadie Collective efforts. And we give specifics as to how they've done this to encourage more action like that. Also prioritize having a Black woman best workplace, which is something that's been my work over the past year. And it's been a priority area for me because I don't want us to be doing work to serve and to improve outcomes for Black women without prioritizing and centering Black women within our workplace. There needs to be some congruence there. So that's like our high level. And then I'll also just quickly touch on our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Index, which is a follow-up to our open letter in 2020. So long story short is that we are measuring institutions and how they are doing on DEI, specifically econ departments, and holding them accountable. And what's been great about the collective is that we are this collection of women. And so if one person has a grievance and they try to address that on their own within the institution, they might have backlash. But if you have a support network that is stepping up and stating that this is a grievance, that allows for some safety. So that is part of what inspires how we do that advocacy work that we do at the Sadie Collective. And then I am quickly going to run through these 10 insights that I've had during my econ and entrepreneurship journey, because I really want to hear from everyone and to engage. And so first, plan with the end in mind, think about longevity, document everything. And this is relatable to like the entrepreneurship journey in terms of being a founder who is going to school and who is currently hiring for an executive director. And so in going through that process, institutional memory is important for this work to continue. And from the very beginning, I've been intentional about documenting everything because I've worked with founders who have then moved on or who were grappling with this question of moving on to do other types of work. And I've seen those struggles. And so in starting the collective, that was really important for me from the very beginning. But then also when it comes to coding, this is very important to document your code so that when the next person comes and they see your code, they are able to follow along and know what's going on. And when I first joined the Fed, I was trying to just like figure things out on my own. There was that moment of like, they hired me, so I have to just know the answers, which, you know, having a learning mindset is rather how you want to approach things. But I was looking at code, trying to solve these questions of how to get the graph to look the way that I wanted it to look without necessarily understanding what was in the code. And it turned out that every time that I would ask an economist about what was going on in the code, they would give me insight that I wouldn't have known otherwise. There was no way that I could actually just like figure it out on my own. I had to speak to them because then they would tell me something like, by the way, so we initially started the graph this way, and then we realized we need to add this, and then I would have a better understanding of what was going on in the code. So also don't hesitate to ask questions in that process. And then next, I want to highlight, provide your perspective, because you may be the only one with your perspective in the room. So choose to be active. And what that reminds me of is having conversations around, so I worked in the global financial flow section of the International Finance Division, and having conversations about remittances and how that really is a financial flow that impacts the aggregate data that we're working with. I've also have brought up interest around emerging markets and how that's documented and explored within the Fed. But I would say that when it comes to what's been most impactful in terms of providing perspective, it's been my diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It's been taking initiative to create spaces that previously did not exist, whether within the Federal Reserve System or outside of it. And when you add your voice, you'd be surprised how that shifts how the entire conversation goes. And I see our voice as either being passive or active. And when you choose for your voice to be active, you are making room for practicing a habit that you want to be associated with you. So if you are finding yourself in spaces where you're not speaking up, but you have a thought and an idea and you're not bringing it up, that is practicing a habit of being passive. And no one wants to be passive. So that's something to consider there. Third is describe problems using data and research, then expect reactions and results. So as you all saw with the data that I shared around Black women's representation, it's jarring. And whenever we mention those statistics, people want to learn more and they want to take action. And especially in this space where we're navigating the economics profession, data is important. And so that's the reason why I highlight that here. But overall, when it comes to having powerful storytelling, data really helps to push the conversation forward. Fourth, actually, ask yourself, who can I take along on my journey? This is the essence of what we're doing at the Sadie Collective. And also, in my personal experience at the Fed, long story short, I had a meeting with the governors and I requested that some of our junior RAs on staff join me in that meeting. And part of the reason for that is because I understood how powerful that moment was. It's one of those moments, and this is also just life in general. There are many moments that we have that are only going to happen once. And I think it's important to explore what it looks like to curate those moments to be exactly how you want it to be. And that's one of the fondest moments that I've experienced. And I'm really glad that I made that request and that ask. And in that meeting, I shared insights from staff about what it looks like to create more opportunities for Black women in the Federal Reserve System. And this was after the Sadie Collective and myself put together a workshop for staff across the Fed about the issue of representation. And something that I also like to highlight here is that while I'm talking about this issue of representation and how there is need for increasing it at the Fed, I recognize as well that there are also plenty of Black women in this space. And one of the most moving experiences that I had was having those women approach me and say, wow, the work that you're doing is so important and we feel seen. It's interesting when you're hearing people's career journeys, and sometimes I see things like, and then I was in DC and Obama was running for office, and then I helped with his campaign. And it's like a very specific experience that's nuanced to that moment in history. And I think that is something to acknowledge in your own journeys as well, is how there is some luck to all of this. Yes, you can work hard, but there's also understanding some of the trends that you're seeing in the moment and meeting that opportunity. And when the Sadie Collective came in, we were coming in at a time that these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion in Econ were very new. And because of that, I see that as some form of luck in how we've been successful. But at the same time, we've also been working really hard. I did not take any Sundays off when I started the collective, of which I have many thoughts about, but that's for a different conversation. But that is also something to keep in mind as well, about how the conditions of a time can influence the opportunities that present itself for you. And then finally, wherever you decide to work, if you see a problem, solve it. That's a part of your legacy. Sometimes your legacy will tie back to you, like you'll get credit for it, and sometimes you don't. And so with the example that I shared around like requesting a prayer room, that's one of those things that I don't know what happened with that, but it could have had an outcome that allows more ease for whoever else comes into that space and who identifies as needing that kind of space for themselves in the workplace as well. Next, find your digital community. Econ Twitter has been cool. They've been super supportive of our work, and that is a part of the digital community that is the Sadie Collective. Next, create your own econ ranking system and definition of success. So econ, as you all may be aware, tends to be very hierarchical. And I think it's really important that you identify what's important to you in terms of the economic space. So if you're thinking about getting a PhD or a master's in econ, it's often recommended that you apply for the top 25 programs and go to the highest ranking one. However, that's 5 years of your life, and perhaps the kind of city that you're in matters to you. And so prioritize that as a part of your process. Relationship management requires attention and genuine interest. So in also taking this year off from Yale, part of that was recognizing that I wanted to nurture the personal relationships that I have in my life more, but then also the relationships that we have for the Sadie Collective. And in 2021, we got some funding from the Gates Foundation, and that was huge. That was a big deal. And I recognized that I could not continue to split my time in order to nurture that relationship with the foundation and other partners. And so, so that's where that comes from. And more generally, when it comes to like building relationships, it takes time to do, and you don't want to be touch and go. You don't want to like be like not consistent or wishy-washy. And then finally, rest enables creativity. Slow down and create room for it. You have one life to live, and overproductivity is unhealthy, and you should be there for those birthdays, for those special moments that are important to you. So that's the last point that I wanted to leave you all with.
Thank you so much, Fanta. That was exactly what I expected. Thank you. It was. I have a lot of questions and comments, but I want to make sure that if anybody has questions from the audience, please ask away. I see Aro is ready with a question. Aro, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hello, Fanta. My name is Aro. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great, very inspiring. And I particularly like the fact that you saw the issue of the lack of Black women in economics. So I had a question about your thought process. I'm originally from Madagascar, and I grew up in Morocco and Ivory Coast. And I came to the US to study economics with the purpose of contributing in Madagascar's economic development. So far, my bigger purpose is still vague. So what's your thought process to narrow down your general purpose to a specific action?
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing about your background. And I know someone who has similar interests. I would love to connect you both. He's also from Madagascar and was a student at the African Leadership Academy with me. So would love to connect afterwards. But to your question about narrowing down your focus, I have not been able to do that. And I've just been enjoying having different interests because we're multifaceted. Like, look at all of the experiences that you have. That's incredible to have lived across 3 different countries, to have learned about their economic systems. And so I think that there is no need to do so. But it's also important that when you are networking with people, they're able to repeat back what you're about and what you do. And so what you described to me is clear to me. So you're passionate about economics in Madagascar, that's enough. And it doesn't have to be like so narrow. And I do think it's worth you speaking to like PhD economists around like macro versus micro and that sort of thing, and concentrations. But I also understand that your first 2 years of the program is like general math concepts that you're mastering, and then you will go more focused later on. And development economics in particular, which is how it's discussed in the context of the United States, is everything. It's macro, it's micro, it's everything. So yeah, that's my piece of advice to you, is that you don't have to narrow it down so much, especially if when you narrow it down, it feels like it doesn't resonate with you. And to also embrace that your ideas may change over time about what your focus is. And that's also a part of your story.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And just a shout out to Aro. Aro is the latest Center for Economic Education Research Fellow. So this summer, he's going to be starting to work on entrepreneurship economics and the development of entrepreneurs in our ecosystem. So thanks, Aro, for being here. And my mom actually has her hand raised. Dr. Sana Al-Balushi. Thank you for being here. You're muted, Mom.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Ray. Thanks, Fanta, for the great, motivational, inspiring talk. I have a question, since my background is education. And since I worked with career guidance and guiding students to different majors and how to help them with their life and future work, I've noticed a lot of, let's say, girls first, and then we'll talk about minorities, they are avoiding STEM. So, like they are avoiding science, technology, maths, engineering. They are avoiding that. And of course, when we look at economics, it's one of them too. And my question to you is, like, when you started with just focusing in economics, did you feel there's like a thin line and you get asked to do other things like with STEM or so on? Because when I looked at the graph you shared with the maths, there are less minorities in the math than the economics. So just how are you dealing with that in your work? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question, Sana. And your son is awesome. He's doing really amazing work. So congratulations to you. So to your question about STEM and girls' representation, I think there's a few reasons why we see it being low. And one of those reasons is how it's taught, and that not being done in a way that that allows people to understand the uses of it, why they should be interested in it. So I think there is room for teaching better. But with that, I also think that programs that have been successful are those who show examples of people, women who have been successful with STEM and how they're using it for the greater good. And generally, when we look at the kinds of fields, for instance, that people are studying instead of economics who identify as Black women, it is fields that have this social orientation to it. So like political science is pretty on par with our population average. Law, social services oriented work. And what people may not know, what young women may not know, is how these fields can be used for the greater good as it relates to the social element, which they tend to have an inclination to. And that exposure can really go a long way. So that's one part of it. And then there's also the issues within the education system in the US. Access is not equal. And the schools that are producing more STEM majors tend to have better access to, let's say, AP Econ classes, AP Calculus classes, and that sort of thing. And so a program like what we're doing with the high school clubs is super helpful for the youth that we work with, because we're bringing resources to that school. We're bringing undergraduate, graduate students, economists to those schools. We're giving incentives to teachers to want to engage with our program so that they are able to motivate people into these fields. And while econ generally, and sometimes, depending on what space you're in, isn't considered a STEM, it requires a lot of math too. And that's what also keeps people out of econ. But we find that reducing barriers such as not seeing examples of people who are using STEM in a way that feels relatable helps a lot. Reducing barriers around access to resources so that you're able to study economics and have access to like coding workshops that are led by Black women goes a long way. So that's an example of how we are helping to make a shift in econ, and that is inspiring more women to go into these spaces. I hope that's helpful.
That is helpful. Thank you for that. We are getting to the 1 o'clock. If you all need to leave, please do so. We appreciate you being here. This was a really exciting conversation. I personally, before we leave, want to offer the Center for Economic Education assistance in increasing our efforts in the state of Kentucky to help develop high school clubs, in partnership with the Sadie Collective. And then the other thing that I would also like to offer is we would love to sponsor students at the undergraduate level to attend the Sadie Collective conference.
Amazing.
So however way we could develop that relationship, and we're not going to just restrict it to Northern Kentucky University, anybody from the state of Kentucky could reach out to us.
That would be awesome. Wow, thank you. I'm excited to continue that conversation.
We will definitely talk offline, Fanta. I really appreciate your time. If anybody has any questions, how could they reach you best?
Yes, so I can be reached via email at fanta.traore@yale.edu. I'm also on social media, so you can reach me at Fanta Traore. And the Sadie Collective is Sadie Collective on all platforms. So you can also find us on there as well.
Thank you so much for your time, and we will catch up soon, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Take care,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks for joining me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.